Now, it's important for me to mention a few basic things before we continue. One is, every location... What's the time, by the way?
5:45.
5:45. Okay, we haven't got much more time today, so we'll go on to tomorrow with this discussion. But every single location is a different condition of love. Every dimension has a different condition of love. And it increases with every dimension. So the second dimension is more loving than the first dimension. The third dimension is more loving than the second dimension. Does that make sense? Now let me explain it completely. As we grow in love, there is a point here that is the most we can grow in love without God's help. And that's the sixth dimension. That's the pinnacle of the love that you can develop within yourself without God. The sixth dimension. This is where, historically, many billions of spirits have stayed for long periods of time. Some of my friends that I know in the spirit world have stayed there for 100,000 years or longer in that dimension. Does that make sense? Because they couldn't grow further without actually engaging God in the process of growing in love. So that's the pinnacle of what is called natural love. What we call natural love. Or the love that comes from, remember I said it earlier, right at the beginning, the love that comes from within ourselves. Beyond that point, where I've drawn this green barrier, you must receive love from God to actually grow beyond that point. If you do not, if you choose to not receive love from God, you will not grow beyond that point. Right? Now, there are many people there who think they are receiving love from God and they're not. So, remember that a lot of the times we think we're doing better than we are, don't we? Even on earth, even the words coming out of my mouth, many of you think you're understanding them, and I can feel that you cannot yet understand them. Does that make sense? We often do this. It's an automatic thing. And so many that reach there, which is a very developed place in love. It's a very beautiful location to live. You can live there for many thousands of years and be completely happy. Yes? But you can't grow beyond that location without receiving God's love, without receiving love from God. So it's important to understand there's these development in love all the way up, but there is a limit to love when you are self-sufficient. When you have a self-reliance, the limit to love is the sixth dimension. Yes? Sometimes in spiritual circles it's called the sixth sphere, and sometimes they refer to 7 spheres, and there's 6. There's actually a lot more than 7, but many of the spirits who talk about it can't talk about what's in the 8th or so forth. Then there is a transitional sphere, a transitional dimension, which is all about you learning about God and other principles about God to become at one with God. And that particular transition is a very, very important transition in your life. That transition, in the first century I call that being born again. It transforms the capacity of your own soul. There's a physical transformation that occurs to your soul that allows it to expand or it causes it to be elastic. You understand? So before then our soul has a finite degree in which we can grow. This is the natural love. You could call that the perfect natural man or woman. You can't grow any further than that without God's love, because the soul is unable to expand. It's unable to be elastic beyond that point without God's love entering it. Once God's love begins to enter your soul, the soul develops an elastic sense to it where it starts to be able to expand beyond its original creation. Yes? And this is what God's love does to your soul. It transforms your soul into a new creature. That's why I called it being born again. Yes? So when you look at this transformational time is very, very important in your future. And remember that every one of these is a layer of love. It's about development in love. So if I go from the first to the second dimension, I've developed in love. Now there is an interstellar boundary between each dimension. An interstellar boundary between each dimension that is thousands hundreds of thousands, in fact, of light years across. You cannot cross the boundary between those two dimensions without being in a certain condition of love. Right? So if my condition of love is the first dimension, and I'd like to go to the second dimension, I can be drawn to go there, but sooner or later I'll hit this interstellar boundary that is a boundary of love that I cannot cross. And my fear will prevent me from crossing it, or other emotions may prevent me from crossing it, and I'll be stopped from progression. Once I've developed in love enough, I can cross that boundary, that interstellar boundary, through my will, by utilising my will, and now I can be in the second dimension of the spirit world. And the same applies with the separation of each dimension. Now, I don't know if you realise on Earth, but at the moment I think they've proven that there is 13 dimensions, mathematically.
14.
Right? I think it's about 13 that they've proven, because they don't have enough supercomputer power to do the computations to prove there's another dimension beyond that. But there is actually far more than 13 dimensions.
My question relates to the concept of these interstellar boundaries.
Yep.
And how it fits into the physical universe or the universe itself. Like you say, it are light years, and you mentioned that the spirit world is made up of antimatter.
Yes.
So can you go a bit further in this?
And our physical universe is consuming matter and spewing out antimatter. And this enables the creation of other dimensional spaces that utilise the antimatter.
So this would be black holes, basically.
Black hole, yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so what happens is the universe, they've found now that there's a number of things that they've found recently about the universe. You know, there's black hole, there's Big Bang theory. That it's still a theory, by the way, it's not a fact, but we teach it as a fact, unfortunately. But the reality is there is a lot of scientific evidence indicating that the Big Bang theory has to make a lot of changes before it actually is exactly how the universe operates. And what they've come to realise is that while our own little physical universe appears to be the entire universe, what they've realised recently through some observations they've done with special telescopes, that the reality is that there may be many physical universes of the same dimensional size of our own. Right? So in other words, there's this bigger universe of which we are just one little part, and that is the reality. There is a physical, universal separation, a boundary, between each one of these dimensions, between each universe. Yeah? And each one of these universes have also the creation of their own dimensional space around them as a result of the process that God has enabled to occur. Yeah. Starting to get a bit technical there.